Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I am Tamara L., and welcome to another installation of Just Another Messenger, where we raise the situational urgency and the consciousness regarding today's current events. Now, we can no longer ignore, hide, as well as escape the past, which tells our present day situation as well as our future. Now, therefore, on each episode of Just Another Messenger, we're going to dive deep into the historical past by examining the philosophies, legal system, and the political decisions that continues to influence our daily lives. Now, let's look at it this way. What if the United States government wasn't just a system of laws and leaders, but a trickster, like a well-known trickster spirit that's masked in patriotism. This is wrapped up in the cloak of patriotism. Now, in this episode, when the trickster fails, the Jackal's last game, we're going to unravel the symbolic legacy of the Jackal, exploring how a cunning figure from a mythological mirrors the rise, dominance, as well as the slow unraveling of the U.S. power from its independence to the digital age of today. Now, join the conversation today. And by doing that, we need you to go and continue to subscribe, share, and like button over on YouTube to be a part of the conversation for more thought-provoking conversation. And you don't want to miss that. Not only you don't want to miss that, you don't want to miss to continue to follow us on our other social sites we have. Follow us over on X at JAM underscore 404 podcast, as well as continue to support our page. We would like to thank our current supporters that continue to support us from day one up into the day. We'd like to thank you for your support, and we'd like to ask that you continue to support us as well as others. You can support us via our Cash App at $ Just Another Messenger. And if you are someone that you know would like to be a part of the show, please provide them with our email information at justanothermessengerpodcast@gmail.com. All right. Now, before we do that, we're going to take a quick break before we get started. We're going to do a little something different today. We're going to get into a little bit more animation to be able to bring forth this understanding of what's going on in society. So just hold tight. All right. We are back, and we are ready to get started. Like I said, we're going to do something a little different this evening. Like I said, don't forget to go over to our YouTube page to subscribe, share, and like. I'd like to thank those that send your comments, your words of encouragement, as well as you would like to hear different topics and like to expound on them. So I thank you for those emails, text messages, and the comments that are placed as well on the YouTube feed. Now, I do understand that people are having trouble on our Facebook with comments, and I went in there and tried to fix whatever. Hopefully you're able to communicate on our Facebook page. If not, I'm hoping your comments will come through. You can go, like I said, go over to our YouTube page and you'll be able to put in whatever comment if you'd like to be a part of the conversation as we go through tonight's event. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead. I'm going to come off the stage. Like I said, we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our episode tonight. All right, so we have our disclaimer here. The views, opinions, and thoughts are the protective expression of Tamara L. for storytelling and educational purposes and does not provide statutory counseling for any United States color of law jurisdictional proceeding. But however, the information will point you in the right direction. So let's look at what's going on around the world. Let's ask ourselves what's really going on around the world. We're going to go ahead and call that Project Colonization 2025. 2025. Now, the United States of America president is taking a bold stand on territorial jurisdiction for the United States with its attempt to purchase or take Greenland. Now, let's look at these also: the proxy war with Israel and Hamas, with the goal of settlement for the U.S. buildup in the Gaza Strip, and the proxy war with the Ukraine and Russian in the hopes of a $15 trillion territorial mineral rights deal, not to mention the removal of Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelan asylum seekers, Mexican migrants, and citizens protected through birthright citizenship from the U.S. jurisdiction. Now, if you're paying any bit of attention to this, one must ponder on the question: are we seeing a 1492 reboot of the doctrine of discovery with corporate land grabs, such as their British ancestors undertook against the indigenous people throughout the earth? Now, as African nations take bold anti-imperialism stand, many indigenous democratic people within the United Territory jurisdictions continue to fight for their continued enslavement. Now, I'm sure the world is wondering what happened to the intellectual revolution to awaken the conscious mind. Now, it kind of reminds me of a quote from Tim Wu. If you haven't read this book, I would suggest that you go get this book. It kind of reminds me of the quote from Tim Wu, and he's the author of The Master Switch, that states, it is an under acknowledged tourism that just as you are what you eat, how and what you think depends on what information you are exposed to. How do you hear the voice of political leaders? Whose pain do you feel? And where do your aspirations, your dreams of good living come from? All of these are products of the information environment. Now, the world once looked at indigenous Americans of the West for information of liberation as political imperial opposition arose in the 60s. However, 50 years later, after the unaliving of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Malcolm X, the fight for the colonial oppression in the West has went docile and very much so quiet. Now, the world now turns its attention to the information from young liberators of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to bring the jackal to heel. Now, to understand the jackal from Ampu to America, we must first understand its origin. Now, the jackal has had various symbolic historical meanings across different cultures. Often associated with death, cunning, as well as the supernatural, as well as someone who does dirty work for someone more powerful, much like a subordinate enforcer or an agent. Now, let's just unearth the ancient cultural jackal that has that of the ancient time period. Let's understand what that means.
He watched over the dead, guided souls through the shadows, and judged the hearts of kings. With the head of a jackal and the power of a god, Anubis wasn't just a figure of myth. He was the protector of eternity. Today, we're unmasking the historical meaning behind the Egyptian jackal god, Anubis. From his rise in ancient theology to his role in one of the most fascinating afterlife belief systems in history. This is just another messenger. Let's dig in. Anubis, known as Inpu in ancient Egyptian, was the god of mummification, tombs, and the afterlife. He's depicted with the body of a man and the head of a jackal, a desert scavenger known to linger around burial sites. That connection wasn't accidental. Ancient Egyptians saw jackals hovering near graves and believed they had a spiritual link to the dead. So instead of fearing them, they elevated them, and in doing so, gave birth to a guardian. Anubis wasn't just a mortuary god. He was a psychopomp, a guide of souls through the veil between life and death. When someone died in ancient Egypt, it was Anubis who prepared the soul for judgment. He presided over the mummification process, ensuring the body was preserved for eternity. He also led the deceased into the Hall of Truth. There, Anubis performed one of his most iconic roles, the weighing of the heart. The person's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic balance. If the heart was lighter, the soul passed into the field of reeds, a blissful afterlife. If heavier, it was devoured by Amit, the soul eater. Anubis wasn't judge, jury, or executioner. He was the gatekeeper, the watcher at the threshold. In the earliest Egyptian myths, Anubis was the god of the dead. But over time, Osiris rose in popularity, taking the throne of the underworld. Anubis didn't disappear. Instead, he evolved. He became Osiris's loyal servant and embalmer, helping to resurrect the slain king. This transition shows how the Egyptians reshaped their deities to reflect cultural and political shifts. Anubis remained vital, but his role became more focused: protector of graves, patron of embalmers, guide to the lost. Today, Anubis is still everywhere. From comic books and tattoos to horror movies and video games, he remains a symbol of mystery, death, and divine judgment. But the real Anubis isn't just spooky. He's sacred. He represents a culture that believed death wasn't the end, just a transformation. And that even in darkness, someone would be there to guide us through. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Would you want Anubis guarding your soul? Or does that...
All right. Now that you've learned about the origin of the four-legged jackal, let's define the two-legged enforcers that government use when they don't want their fingerprints on the mess. When they don't want their fingerprints all on what's going on. Let's look at these two-legged jackals. Now, here's the kicker. The United States Western government hasn't officially coined the term jackal in any of their policies or public addresses, but it has obviously been lived on by in the actions of their deeds, the actions that has taken place in the various continents. Now, what does the jackal really come in at? The term was popularized in political slang and intelligence circles, especially during the Cold War and beyond, to describe covert operatives such as the CIA or the FBI, assassins, as well as expendable agents used by powerful institutions to do their dirty work. Let's go forward with this two-legged jackal here. Now, most nations' corporate jackals come as a friendly alliance to the indigenous nations. In the case of Benjamin Franklin, as you can see here, when he came forward to the Iroquois Confederacy, and he looked upon the Iroquois Confederacy as a great nation that understood governance. And as you can see here, it said in a speech in the representative of Parliament in Pennsylvania, Franklin once revered to the Anishinaabe as their governance, saying that the precepts governments under which the Six Nations have prospered for countries can teach us as much as we have learned. This is how much Benjamin Franklin reveled regarding the knowledge that he was learning from the Iroquois Confederacy. So with that being said, unfortunately, Benjamin Franklin's strategy was very manipulative in nature, with idea of slavery for the indigenous people and liberty for his British brethren at large. And let's just see how Benjamin Franklin was a part of being a jackal in the movement of colonization.
They say Ben Franklin was a genius, a founding father, a man of reason. But what if he was also a jackal? Today, we unmask how Franklin watched the Iroquois Confederation, then learned from them, and used their wisdom to build something much more dangerous. In 1744, colonial leaders met with the Iroquois at the Treaty of Lancaster. It was supposed to be about land, peace, diplomacy. But in the back, one man wasn't negotiating. He was watching. That man was Ben Franklin. He wasn't in charge yet, but he was learning. He saw how the Iroquois Confederation spoke with one voice. 6 nations, 1 council, total unity. And like any good jackal, he took notes. The Iroquois had a complex system of democracy long before the United States existed. Franklin saw that system, and by 1754, at the Albany Congress, he presented the Albany Plan of Union. His goal? Unify the colonies under one structure, to rival the Iroquois, and eventually to overpower them. It would be a strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union, and yet that a like union should be impracticable for 10 or a dozen English colonies. Admiration? Maybe, but this wasn't respect. This was strategy. Franklin saw a model and weaponized it. By the time the United States was born, the Iroquois system had been dissected and repurposed. Franklin and others built a new government inspired by indigenous wisdom, but excluded indigenous voices. The jackal doesn't build from nothing. He builds from what others leave behind. He didn't steal it out of hatred. He stole it out of ambition. And like a jackal, Franklin fed on what was sacred to others, to make something stronger, something colonial. Franklin is remembered as a visionary, but maybe he was just the cleverest predator in the room. He took indigenous structure. He turned it into colonial power, and he did it with a smile. So, was Franklin a student of democracy or a jackal in the shadows? Did Ben Franklin honor indigenous wisdom or consume it? Drop your thoughts in the comments.
Now, other jackals appeared as nations such as France, Dutch, Spanish, Netherlands, Sardinia, and the British, with a sole agenda of colonization, subjugation, domination, and territorial jurisdiction over the land, water, natural resources, as well as the people.
When we talk about empires, especially the British, we often talk about redcoats, kings, taxes, and tea. But the real story of empire isn't just written in parliament halls. It's written in villages burned, promises broken, and alliances betrayed. And nowhere is that clearer than in how Britain treated indigenous nations during its fight for dominance in North America. This is the story of the Collateral Allies. When we talk about the British in North America, we picture redcoats fighting revolutionaries. But before the shots at Lexington and Concord, the British were already locked in a brutal campaign against indigenous nations. From 1754 to 1783, Britain's colonial war machine wasn't just aimed at France or rebellious colonists. It was aimed at indigenous sovereignty. This war is often called the French and Indian War, but that name hides the truth. Indigenous nations were not just helpers. They were strategic powers in their own right. The Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Shawnee, and many more were forced to choose sides as 2 European empires fought on their land. The British saw them as tools, not partners. When indigenous groups sided with France, the British unleashed brutal campaigns, burning villages, destroying food supplies, and committing acts that would today be called war crimes. When the war ended, the British didn't stop. They expanded. Settlers flooded indigenous lands, violating treaties and boundaries. In response, Odawa leader Pontiac united multiple nations in a powerful resistance. The British response? Total war. They used scorched earth tactics and in one of history's most chilling moments, considered biological warfare smallpox-infected blankets sent into indigenous camps. This was the reality of British Empire promises made in diplomacy, broken by conquest. During the American Revolution, Britain tried a new tactic using indigenous nations as proxy allies. They promised protection of indigenous lands if tribes fought against the colonists. Some nations, like the Mohawk under Joseph Brant, aligned with the British. Others sided with the Americans. The result, indigenous civil war. But when the war ended, so did the charade. In the Treaty of Paris, 1783, Britain handed over huge swaths of indigenous territory to the new United States. They didn't consult their indigenous allies. They didn't honor their promises. They simply handed the land over and sailed home. The British weren't just fighting revolutionaries. They were fighting indigenous sovereignty every step of the way. And when it no longer served them, they abandoned their allies without a second thought. Because to the empire, indigenous nations were never equals. They were collateral allies. For nearly 30 years, Britain used indigenous nations as shields, swords, and scouts, then tossed them aside when the treaties were signed. And what's worse, they weren't alone. Because soon, a new power would rise from the ashes of that war, and it would inherit the Jackal's game with sharper teeth and a new flag. Stick around, because next, we reveal how the United States picked up where Britain left off. Subscribe to Just Another Messenger.
This is where the United States picked up. The United States independence, it framed a cunning move. And it turns a small colony, such as the various 13 colonies, into outwitting an entire British Empire. Now, when Britain signed that Treaty of Paris in 1783, it gave the United States colonies absolute nation sovereignty, which, however, it didn't end the war. They just passed the torch. As you can see, though the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783, between the American colonies and Great Britain, it ended the American Revolutionary War for United States colonies in Great Britain, but it formally recognized the United States as an independent nation, and a new nation arose from the ashes of rebellion, but it inherited more than just land. It inherited Britain's war against the indigenous people. And as you see, this is what we talk about territorial jurisdiction. And we put a pin in that so we can bring this home and have it and understand it in more detail. This territorial jurisdiction, it deals with the power of a state to exercise authority over the people, property, and events in its territory. Now, this is what the argument is connected to the Supreme Court in the United States talking about birthright citizenship, as well as the argument that is taking place between the 14th Amendment argument that is taking place in the course between Khalid Muhammad, and of course it's dealing with territorial sovereignty and jurisdiction regarding the event with Mahmoud Khalid. So these are what the arguments is about. It's about the territorial jurisdiction, which is the power of a state, or is it the power of the centralized government? Because it started, each state within the colony was its own nation. So what Trump is doing is removing a lot of the arguments from the federal question. And so those arguments can now be taken back to the state, because each state has its own constitution. So that's what we're dealing with, territorial jurisdiction, which is the power of a state to exercise its authority over the people, property, and events in its territory. Now, this is codified in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the United States Constitution that deals with federal territorial jurisdiction. Also, in Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, it deals with the United States territorial sovereignty managed by the United States Congress. Now, this will make a lot more sense. Now, when you have to go into the context of understanding what we're dealing with, now you have to understand that what colonization truly is, because you wouldn't know. Now, we look at our brothers and sisters to the east, and we are glorified the fight that's taking place between the anti-imperialism fight that's taking place between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger against the Western government. But we don't see ourselves as being in that position because we're in a worse position than our brothers and sisters of the East because we do not have the territorial jurisdiction to the land. So our brothers in the East are in a much better position of liberation than we are in the West. And we must look at this in full detail. Now, we're going to look at the Treaty of Paris. Now, we talk about the Treaty of Paris established the territorial sovereignty for the United States. Now, we're going to pinpoint this at 1783, where the indigenous people were now classified. Now, let's go back and pinpoint this as the point of 1783, where the indigenous people are now classified as Black, Negro, colored, and African American, where we lost the nationhood status and became now citizens through subjugation of the United States at America, which brought about later on the Naturalization Act because of loss of your nationhood. Now, this is why they can't deport you because you're already home, Dorothy. You're already home. This is why they can't deport you. They can deport everyone else. Now, let's play into the game. Let's play into the game of the out of Africa theory. If that was such true, everyone that's dark hue, that is classified as a person of color, that is classified that they are Black, you would have been the first one to round up. And they don't care if they would have had to put you in a cage on an island somewhere until a nation of Africa picked you up. That would have been so to do so if you were truly out of Africa. Just as there are telling the asylum seekers that came over from Cuba, it's time to pack up. They're giving them 30 days to pack up. They can do that to the people they once gave asylum to for Cuba. They say, okay, you can go back home now. But they can't do that to the people that they classified now as Black, Negro, colored, and African American, because this land, America's, is already your home. So that's why they can't deport you. However, they can codify stricter laws for enforcement, which was done through the 13th Amendment. And that's why it reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, which means if you commit a crime, then you can be placed back into slavery, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. So slavery never was abolished. Slavery never went away. Slavery is just codified into the 13th Amendment, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. You get that? Subject to their jurisdiction. That is territorial jurisdiction, well, of the various states. So if you commit a crime, even in a state law, even the state itself can exercise the federal 13th Amendment and place you back into slavery. That's how that reads there. And let's look at this Treaty of Paris. We're going to look at this Treaty of Paris that shows how the United States, we're going to look at that. We're going to look and see how the United States it granted the power of as a nation. All right. So let's look at this Treaty of Paris. in its fullness. See if I can increase that for you. Hmm. Let me see if I can open that up. Well, okay, Zoom. I'm trying to zoom in. All right, let's see. Let me just read this here for you until I can figure out how to zoom this puppy in here. You know, the Zoom always going to give you trouble when it's time to do it. All right. All right. Let's just read this here. This treaty signed on September 3rd, 1783, between the American colonies. You see that? You see American colonies and Great Britain ended the American Revolution and formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. Now it's the American War for Independence. See this? So when they lie about July the 4th, 1776, that was a bold lie. That was a bold lie. That was a bold lie. July the 4th, 1776 is an announcement that they made to the King of England that they wanted independence. It was a proclamation to announce. Proclamation means to announce. They sent an announcement to the King of England that they wanted that the different Lord proprietors who had received the license to merchandise and do business under the name of those various corporations, the Georgia Corporation, the Virginia and London Corporation, they made an announcement proclaiming, it's like saying, hey, we want to do a takeover, a corporate buyout, a corporate takeover. They made a proclamation of announcement on July the 4th in 1776 to the king. They did it in writing. When you proclaim something, it have to be done in writing. However, that takeover it didn't take place until war. It took place by war. So which means which was the American Revolution. And after so much spillage and death and cost of resources, British said, okay, we're going to allow this to take place. So they went to Paris. They went to Paris and signed this treaty. They signed this treaty on September the 3rd, 1783. And this was not until they said between the American colonies, which are the 13 colonies, and Great Britain ended the American Revolution. And this was actually a world conflict involving not only the United States and Great Britain, but also France, Spain, and the Netherlands. The peace process brought a nuisance United States into the arenas of international diplomacy, playing against the largest and most established powers on earth. Now, the three American negotiators, check this out. These are the Jackals: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay. They had proved themselves for the world stage, achieving many of the objectives, which means becoming friendly allies with the various nations that was already governance in the Americans, and basically overthrowing them, allowing them to put their guard down and overthrowing them. And then some of them were not allies with British, they were allies with the French. So, you know, our people was fighting different on different sides of different colonial powers. And so they said achieving many of the objectives sought by the new nations. Two critical provisions of the treaty were British recognition recognized of the U.S. independence and the delineation of the boundaries that would allow for American Western expansion. Put a pin in that, because the delineation of the boundaries that would allow for American Western expansion, That was that became known as the destiny of destiny amnesty. So I'm going to show you that information as well. So within that, and that is also codified in the colonial charter of 1606 with the Virginia Company. So you have to look at all this. Tamara, why are you telling us this? This information is very, if we don't know, if you don't know how the colonial corporation is set up, you wouldn't know how to go by addressing it for to be able to be not a part of it. Because you can be a part of it and continue with your subjugation, or you can stay, or you can request for to be restored to your nationhood. And that's called post-millennium. So we have to look, you have to look at areas of redress. So it talks about in the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment, you have a right to your grievances and redress. One of your grievances of redress is nationhood status and sovereignty. If you are aware that you under political subjugation and colonization, you have a right to address that. You have the right to look at that. Now, so this treaty will provide that information for you. So we're going to continue on with understanding what does this mean? What does this mean? All right, we're going to remove this from the stage. So, all right. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at the new United States nation. You know, as a Jackal, it uses the treaties and broken promises and the likes of that to expand westward, thus displacing indigenous people. Now, the westward expansion, it led to the following, which is now called the Northwest Territories. As you see in the Treaty of Paris of 1783, it led to the ability for the new nations now to have a charter to expand west. That's where they come up with Go West, Young Man. Okay, so the Northwest Ordinance, as you can see in the first picture, that is what it looked like. The Ohio, it was called the Ohio map. It wasn't different states as we see today called Minnesota, Wisconsin. This is what it became when the boundaries was delineated. It was originally the Ohio Nation. This was the Ohio Nation. This was a nation that was usurped in this region known as the Ohio Nation. So, but which became, as you can see to the left, the Northwest Territory. And it includes the current states of Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota. Now, this Northwest Ordinance happened in 1787 and it was a third in a series of congressional acts to outline a plan for organizing the territory into new states and their subsequent incorporation into the largest framework of American federalism. Now, also during after that time period, there was a battle that took place called the Battle of Falling Timbers in 1794, where the U.S. its forces crushed the indigenous allies, and it paved the way for what is called the Treaty of Greenville. And that was surrounding huge portions of the Ohio Nation. Now, as they continue to move forward, as you can see, the territory acquisition is starting in 1783, like I said, and then you had the 1787 Northwest Ordinance. And as they continue to go out west, you have what you call manifest destiny, which is land grabs via the Louisiana Purchase. You have the Texas Annex. It was annexed in 1847. You have also the Mexican Secession of 1848. And so when they talk about build a border on who? The border, there's no need to build something physical, such as a border, when there's already territorial borders that exist through acquisition, being ceded over based off conquest. And then you have the Oregon country British claims extinguished in 1846. And then you also have where Russia ceded over Alaska to the United States around 1850. And then you have with Hawaii. Hawaii was not ceded over through a secession. Hawaii was under subjugation because Queen Kokalani never signed anything to transfer over the land to the United States. All right. So this is what you call the manifest destiny.
They called it a divine mission, a God-given right, a destiny. But behind the stars and stripes was a blueprint for domination and the footprints of a jackal. This is the story of manifest destiny, how an idea wrapped in patriotism led to the destruction of cultures, the theft of land, and the rebranding of conquest as progress. The term manifest destiny was first used in 1845 by journalist John L. O'Sullivan. He claimed it was America's fate, no, its duty, to spread from coast to coast. Under the banner of manifest destiny, the U.S. exploded westward. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled U.S. territory. In the 1830s, the Indian Removal Act led to the Trail of Tears, displacing tens of thousands of indigenous people. The genius of manifest destiny was in its disguise. It painted colonization as a moral duty, a gift of democracy, Christianity, and industry. Manifest destiny never really ended. Today, its echoes still shape policy and power, through pipelines, land disputes, and political rhetoric about Make America Great Again. The myth lives on, in textbooks, monuments, and slogans.
As you can see, they didn't call it an empire. They're not calling it an empire. It's cloaked in disguise, and the footprints of it is called freedom. But to the indigenous nations who know who they are and have not had the ability to exercise that due to fear or other events of subjugation, forced subjugation that takes place, such as, so you have these movements that are disguised under Black liberation of the indigenous nation. It's just the same Jackal with the new face of freedom, but its footprints mark subjugation. Now, as we wrap up part one, because there's so much to bring into understanding who and what this jackal is in this episode. As you see, we followed the Western U.S. government's rise not as a beacon of freedom, but as a trickster, a shapeshifter, and a master of various different masks. Now, like you said, we started this from 1744 at the Lancaster Treaty, where Ben Franklin studied the political unity of the Iroquois Confederacy, not to honor it, but to adopt it for colonial ambition. And as he observed, he learns, and like many good jackal, he waits. And then we fast forward to the Albany Plan of the Union, the French Indian War, the Declaration of Independence. Now, keep in mind, each step looks like liberation, but behind it, it's the jackal making his move, taking land through treaties, force, and fraud. Then comes the 1800s with the mass slips under the banner of manifest destiny. The jackal reveals itself in full hunger, which continues to displace the indigenous nations. And it carved out Mexico. It carved it up. Now this frontier is open, and it bleeds out the indigenous people. And yet, through all of it, the U.S. government continues to smile to say it's fulfilling a divine mission. But this isn't destiny. This was a design. This is well designed. And this is how jackals move: clever, calculated, and always circling. And by the time the U.S. reaches the Pacific Ocean, the trick is complete. But is it truly complete? Because not only um is the jackal within, it goes abroad and it goes across a continent. And now the open question should remains, where does this jackal go? And that's what we're going to talk about in part two. We're going to continue this, and we're going to talk about in part two. We're going to uncover how American expansion wasn't just a policy; it was a performance of the liberator abroad, from the manipulator within, the land that we stand on today. Until next time, I would say stay woke, stay informed, and stay ready. And also stay on the lookout for my book that's going to be launched on April the 22nd, called Sacred Selfishness: The Art of Loving Without Losing Yourself. Are you ready to reclaim your power in love? What if you never had to choose love again? What if you could give love without exhausting yourself? What if putting yourself first actually made your relationship stronger? This book will teach you how to love from abundance, not scarcity, how to prioritize yourself without guilt, and how to love deeply while standing fully in your own power. I just truly believe if you don't have the sacredness of the love for yourself, you can't have the collective sacredness of the love of a nation that is under subjugation in order for liberation. And that's what brought about this book. Now, until then, continue to tune in every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As I stated, we're not monetizing on YouTube. Please support our channel via Cash App at $ just another messenger. And if you are someone you know would like to be a part of more than just talk, conversations that matter, no wine, no cigars, no liquor, none of that, please send us an email to justanothermessengerpodcast@gmail.com. Until then, thank you for tuning in. Enjoy your weekend and have a great day.